Good evening and welcome to the HUUSD something's on. Yep. Board meeting for 12/18/2024. Is it off? Is it off? Okay. Okay. Good evening. Thanks everyone for coming. We have some people here in the audience, which is great. Start by calling the meeting at 02. I see a few people here, but none of these people are here for public comment, as it were. So is there anyone in Zoom looking for a moment of public comment? Let me see if there are any hands raised. I don't see anyone with their hand up. If you want to speak, please let us know by raising your virtual hand. Welcome to board members in Zoom. Okay, the first thing we're going to do, but first we're going to amend the agenda. Tori's going to make the amendment.
I move to amend the agenda to include an executive session at the end.
Do I have a second? Do I have any abstentions or no votes on adding an executive session? Okay, not seeing any or hearing any. That will pass. We're going to add an executive session. Okay. First, we are going to hear from Jody from the Career Center. Why don't you come on up here, Jody, and sit at the table? We're getting a little Career Center breakdown here.
I can pull it up.
Jody Emerson, who is the superintendent and principal of the Central Vermont Career Center.
Everyone, thanks for having me. Every year in December, I get to visit all of the boards across my sending schools and deliver our budget presentation. The information for anyone who was on the board last year and the year before is very familiar. We did change the formatting a little bit just so it changed it up some. And I do have some information that's really new to us that I can talk about later and might answer some questions. Hopefully we'll find this.
One second.
Thank you. So you'll notice that there are some images in the slideshow, and every year we do update with images from the current year. So you may see someone you recognize in here. So we became a Career Center school district. This is our third year of being a school district. And our mission as a district is to support and prepare educators, students to be engaged members of a diverse society, to be ready for the workforce and hopefully staying in our state through our programming that provides lots of skill building and development in lab spaces and experiential learning. And I know that many of you are familiar with our center. You've visited it or you've been appointed to our board at some point and taken part in that, so that's great. The goals here are the same goals that I had last year because the board is still working on these same goals. The probably the biggest one that'll be having an impact in the future is our long-term planning. There's a vision to, by 2029, have a standalone career center that is able to provide access to more and more students. We just closed our first round applications at 3 o'clock today, and we had 334 applicants, which is up from 299 last year, from 269 the year before, from 248 the year before that. So each year, more and more applicants and not a lot more spaces, unfortunately, in our current location. And so we're looking to make sure that we, and in the future, don't turn away so many students. We want to make sure that they have access. Additionally, we're looking at always improving our education quality across our programs. This year, the Perkins 5, which we get a grant from, and all of our monitoring and the way that the AOE determines whether we're making our goals is around that Perkins 5 expectations. So this year, every program needed multiple industry recognized credentials, 6 credits from college, or a combination of both. The only exception to that is our exploratory program, which is a 10th grade and some 9th grade programs. But all of our junior and senior programs are required to have industry recognized credentials, credits, or both. And so it has to be 2 or 6, depending on which of those it is, or a mixture of those. And then finally, community engagement. And one way we've been working on that goal is recently we've been moving our board meetings around. So actually last week we met here. Thank you for allowing us to use your space. And we got to meet our newest board member at that point. So it's easier for you, right, Corey? Just be in his home base. Next month we're at Montpelier. Go ahead. So when I'm thinking about the budget, what the board has said to me is that we should develop this and implement towards a full day educational opportunity for students. So not just coming for the program day, which is currently 8:30 to 12:30, but looking ahead to a future where in that standalone center or whatever we do in the future to expand, that we also are expanding the day and giving students the access to academics that better fits their interests in programming instead of the more traditional way of gaining proficiencies and credits. So that's one of the charges that I have to be thinking about each year as I plan moving forward, to increase student access to our programming, as I said earlier, and to enhance student preparedness for the workforce. So those are the 3 things that I'm supposed to be working on and thinking about as I move into the budgeting cycle. Go ahead. And the why I've already talked about a little bit, that access for students. It's really, while 334 applicants is really exciting, it's also a little heartbreaking because I know there's at least 60 students who we're not going to be able to accept right off the top. And that is heartbreaking. And so trying to figure out a way to expand in a space where we can't expand within our regular day, but maybe with extended day, as we think about it, to improve the academics across our programming, and just find more ways for students to get access, even if it's smaller opportunities. So some of those things that we're thinking about as we move forward. However, we do want to, you can move that along. We do want to know and think about the fact that all of our sending schools are making some really difficult decisions right now, and that the climate around funding education is not good. It's a struggle, and you all are probably talking about that tonight, as is the other 2 boards I'm visiting tonight. Thinking about costume change in the middle. I don't know. So thank you for starting your meeting with me. That certainly helped me. The CVCC mission statement hasn't changed. It's very similar to the district one, but just having it here so you can refer to it in the future. Again, it's making sure that we're preparing students for the workforce, that we have programming that meets the industry needs locally. Every 2 years, we do a comprehensive local needs assessment, and we have to look at the data that we get back from surveys, look at labor market data, look at our accountability information that comes in from the state, and try to make decisions around programming based on that. What I'm going to present to you tonight is a level services budget. And I know that might be hard to think about when most of our sending schools cannot do a level services budget next year. That's what we're presenting with, and wanting to share with you the knowledge that on January 13th, we will be looking at these application numbers and the board will make a decision on whether we'll keep all the programming we have. There's a couple of programs that have been under enrolled. One is paused this year. If we don't have enough applicants, we might be able to find another way to allow students access and not continue those programs. So what I'm saying to you is that this is the highest our budget could be. It could go lower. There are chances that something could change and that when we come back with the actual tuition that we're expecting on January 15th, it could be lower than what we have in this presentation. Go ahead. So we're really budgeting all year round, thinking about what we're going to need. We look at the equipment we have, which is probably different than what you have in a lot of your classrooms. I know that there is a brake lathe that we need in automotive for next year, for example. So that's a $20,000 piece of equipment for our automotive program. In the past, we've purchased new mannequins in our emergency services program we've shared that across all of our health sciences. And one of the benefits of that big cost item is that we've been able to lease that one, and our EMS services locally, Barrytown especially, have been using it for training of adults as well. So we were able to get an ambulance from Barrytown, and they come in and use our equipment for training. So we have a nice relationship going on there, and we're hoping that we can expand our industry relationships in similar ways. So we look at what is the equipment that we're going to need across our programs. We look at what we might want to open. There were initially, as I was planning up to what we would try to do by FY29, I had hoped to open a human services program next year and also a ninth grade foundations program to kind of support ninth graders in developing the math and literacy skills they need to be successful in CTE. We're not going to open any programs next year. It's just not the timing based on where you're at, even though it means that maybe some of these students that are wanting to get in could have found a way to do that. So we're always trying to balance and think about what do we need to do to be sensitive to the fact that our sending schools do pay a portion of this tuition directly. We bill you directly for some of it. Go ahead. So when we did bring the initial level services plan to the board, that budget was a 9% increase. Since then, we've gotten the base education rate, which changed. It decreased 3%. And so what that means for us, as the base education rate goes down, the off the top and on behalf payment directly from the state education fund to us goes down, because we get 87% of our 6 semester FTEs, which is different than your long-term weighted whatever. It's also complicated.
I just have to jump in and say I attended the meeting as well. If you are already confused with the pre-K-12 funding system, I suggest you not attend the CVCC meeting and try to understand their system, because it is even maybe a little more complex.
They're both complex, they're different. So basically we take that base education rate, which is set by the legislature, actually was set back in 2002, I think. So there was a base amount, and then they use some index and some formula to determine what that is. It's the first time it's gone down, and it went down 3%. So that means that it impacts that off the top on behalf payment from the education fund. It impacts a tuition reduction grant that we get from the state. And so it increases your contribution, or that direct piece that we bill back to you. So the board had initially asked us to come back with between 9% and 15%. We came back with between the 10.8, which was our new level services based on that base education rate, and a 13.3% to the board last week when we were here. And they decided to go with that level services budget, pending any changes that might make in January. Some of the same things affect us. The healthcare increase affects us. That base education rate affects us. The liability insurance that we have impacts us as well. So those lots of increases, of course. And then, of course, trying to keep students here. We also have different class size expectations. And so in many of our programs, especially in the heavy trades that are dangerous, you can have 16 students. You cannot exceed that with one instructor. You would have to have a second instructor or a lab assistant. So we're going to look at numbers soon, and I'll talk a little bit more about that then. We also are in negotiations this year, and we have no clue where that's going to land because they haven't actually started that negotiations other than the ground rules. So that's going to start taking place next month after we set our budget. So another added component, what you'll see there in that kind of circle there is our anticipated tuition for 20,738. You'll also see the increase that we've had in FTEs. Our FTEs are a 6-semester average. So right now in the building, I have 217 students. All I can bill for is 184 under the CTE rules. So next year we anticipate it. Actually, we got our FTEs today. So we thought it would be 194 and it's going to be really close. My business manager was really close, 193.18. So our numbers are going to change a little bit as a result of that, but not a whole lot. Go ahead. It's really small for the people in the room, but I think you have a copy somewhere. In fact, I can't read it here. But what you're going to see, there's like a head count as to how many students are in the program right now. And there's also the total number that we could have. In any case where there's like automotive, electrical, plumbing, medical professions, which are the other ones? Culinary, baking, and building trades, those all have co-op students in them, or they have had co-op students in them. So that might be where they're up and over. So if it says 21, we have 16 first years and 5 second years who are spending 1 day with us at the center and 4 days out on a job, working and earning money. Go ahead. So our budget increase is 10.8% if we stick with this level services. Our tuition increase is 9.7%. But the increase in the amount that's billed directly to each of our sending schools per FTE is 28% because of that base rate going down. So last year we had a tuition that was, or we're currently billing 7,536. We anticipate if we stay with this rate, a 9,717 minus a $500 approximate credit that because at the end of each year we get told what our allowable tuition was based on actuals. And so if we overcharge, we have to send money back. So we overcharged last year. So you're going to get a $500 credit per each FTE for that year. Complicated. The next two slides are just diagrams to kind of show you that similar to any educational center, that a bulk of our costs are in instruction and personnel. So you'll see that 70% of our costs are people costs. So salaries and benefits. And there's different pieces of that broke out as to where those are. And then the next one is more of the, here's what salary and benefits, here's what the contracted services that we have. We pay a facilities use fee. We have to get supplies. So all of those things, what portion of our budget they take. The top one is the offset, I think. No, it's tuition. So we do have some adult students that join us for our day program, and we can charge 40% of our high school tuition to adults who join us. So the anticipated tuition for this coming year is $19,500. Then we have that ed support grant, which is diminished. That's actually the off the top on behalf payment from the ed fund, which is diminished from previous years because of that decrease. The state tuition reduction is decreased. We get some salary assistance for a bunch of our positions. That'll stay the same unless people switch out, and then we get reimbursed whatever the percentage is of that. So it's either 35% or 50% of the salary. And then we do have some businesses. Our automotive program can do tires and brakes and oil changes if you want that for cheap. Come on down. Our automotive instructor will tell you that it takes longer than your regular garage. So if you need your car back that day, might not happen, should happen, but it might not. We also have baking and culinary business and cosmetology. You can come get a haircut, color, those sort of things in our salon. It's open to outside guests Tuesdays and Thursdays from 9 to noon. Uh, you can order them. They're catering. So it's usually a catering piece, unless you're in the building. I could maybe give a shout out when there's going to be a bake sale. Or goodies. Once in a while, we get a Friday goodie treat. We haven't had that yet. Soon. What questions do you have?
What are the two programs that have the low attendance? That are the ones that are
There's design and fabrication, which is our stone trades program. Unfortunately, it's both of the only programs in the state. And the other one is the emergency services 2 paramedicine program, the only one in the country. So there's a lot, there's heartstrings involved in this, and they're really powerful and meaningful. So we'll see what happens.
questions from anybody in Zoom? For Jody? Go ahead, Dan.
Thanks. I think that's really great stuff. My question for Jody or maybe Dr. Mike, I'm not sure who can answer it better, but if you go full-time in 2029, how does that impact tuition rates and or our pupil counts?
Doesn't impact tuition rates because I can't change that. I get what I get for the FTEs unless there's a massive overhaul of the funding formula. I don't think it changes pupil counts either unless I become an LEA, which I'm not. So
Thank you. You know, I'm a huge supporter. I think do amazing work. Why did the base rate go down? Do we know? Because the state talks a real good game about supporting this, and obviously we need it in our state, and so that's just confusing to me.
I'm told it's based on an index that has decreased. So I don't think anyone knows for sure except Brad James, who does all this stuff. And he disappeared for a while and he came back, and he's the one that does all the calculations in the background and turns it over to us. There's been a lot of questions. The CTE directors are very concerned about this. Several of them were trying to also make sure that they were doing the same types of increases to their budget that were going on in their sending schools. So if it's a 4% increase, that's what they were trying to do. And that this means that they have to cut a program to be able to do that. So there's lots of concerns about that. He's not been able to answer that yet in a way that we can understand. But I believe he's going to be participating in our meeting tomorrow. And so I might be able to follow up with more information on that. Yes, but I can't give you a qualified answer on that piece.
Thank you, Jody. Anybody else? Any other questions? Bobby.
Hi, Jody. I just wanted to follow up on the previous, not the last question, but the question before that, because reading an article, I read an article a while ago in the Times Argus about the idea that was floated of building a more regional high school and that certain schools would participate in that. And I haven't heard anything more about it. But in that article, it maintained that if a number of students leave the sending school, then those students would no longer count in the pupil count for the sending school, that there would be a reduction. And so I just wanted to follow up on Dan's question so I could better understand.
I am not remembering that part of the article. I trust that it was in there. It really depends on if there's a change. So if there were to become a regional technical high school where we were diploma granting, then yes, that would change it. But as long as we're not diploma granting, there's still a portion of that student that is yours and belongs to you the whole time. So it's really complicated. One of the things that we were concerned about was just, yes, we're taking the students into our center, so that takes away students from the sending schools there during the full day or the partial day. And what impact does that have on the sending schools whose declining enrollment is impacting their ability to provide programming? I think it impacts your ability to have classes and maybe the number of teachers you can have based on whatever class size decisions each sending district makes. So it's not to say that there aren't impacts, but the tuition is whatever we set for a tuition, the formula is the same, and we can't change it because we have a student 2 hours longer than we do right now, if that makes sense.
And there is a cost to us for the students. It's how they're credited back with the formula for pupil counts. So we still get some credit, even though there's a cost. They still are taking classes here for some of their academics. So that's when we say, when you look at the formula, and it also depends on each school because their cost is the same for all of the sending schools, but the sending schools have different costs per pupil. So it's all over the place for districts.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bobby.
Harwood's FTE, 6 semester FTE for this year is currently 25.84. Next year, it's projected to be 27.83. And you have 50 of our first round applicants this year.
Forward to hearing about your progress with your big project. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate what you're doing. Thank you. Okay. Next we're going to hear from Dwayne and Jen from CrossFit are going to give us some highlights of how things are going over there. Welcome, you guys. Nice to see both of you. Happy holidays.
I did share a document with everybody here, but I also have hard copies if people are more hard copy like me. So I'm happy to also pass those around for anybody who is here. I can definitely give one to Lisa. Here, pass away. Pass away.
Testing. Can you hear me? Testing. It's been a long time since I've been here. Hi, C. Thank you for having Jen and myself here this evening. We're really excited to talk about CrossFit Brook and some of the experiences we have had and hope to have in the not too distant future. But before we start, I just want to, I know you heard from Brookside, I think last week a little bit, and Ashley and Dr. Mike invited us to come tonight to kind of talk a little bit about CrossFit. So, just to make sure that we're hitting all the points, are there any specific questions or things that people want us to be talking about before we do our very brief, informal sort of presentation?
I don't think there are.
That is good. That's
Didn't
good.
pre-game for you at all,
Okay.
so go just give us your best.
So I'll just start really briefly. Our school is based on a vision about what we want our community, our school community to be about. And we strongly believe that all students, or what our mission is to create students that are curious, that are caring, and are connected. And we use all C words because we're also the Cougars and we're also CrossFit Brook. So it makes it easy to remember what we're doing and why we're doing it. And well,
C word that I like.
you do that.
So we do that through being consistent. We build a consistent community that where we have high expectations for kids, where we offer opportunities for students to explore and learn in ways that work for them. We build upon that through the experiences that they have both in the classroom and out of the classroom. And it's something that we both value and something that we have really dedicated ourselves to this last year and a half. And that's really what builds the community that we have. Our teachers, our staff, our students. We couldn't do what we do every single day without the caring community that we have.
Yeah, and we work in tandem. I mean, we have a partnership. Jen and I do everything together, not every activity, but we definitely confer with each other. We both have strengths. We both have challenges, and we kind of it's a good puzzle. We're good puzzle pieces together, and we're really excited to continue this work. Those C's are really important. And I know some of you have been to our assemblies. I believe Cindy, right? You came to an assembly, and Ashley, have you been to one? Yep. Dr. Mike has been to. Dr. Mike sang at an assembly. It's amazing. He didn't, but you could if you wanted
I'm
to.
dancing at the next one.
Okay, very good.
Perfect. Yes.
But we are really looking for student voice, and I love to see the Harwood students here. I think that's awesome, and we also want to incorporate student voice as something we're going to be looking at in the not too distant future. But it's all in these notes that we provided to you, all around the C's.
What's amazing is all of our students start their days together in different ways. So our 5th and 6th graders have homeroom and morning meeting, and they practice responsive classroom. In the 7-8, they are spread amongst their AGs or advisory groups, and it's opportunities for students to connect with different teachers, whether they are applied academics teachers or core teachers, and they're not necessarily on their team, which is really cool. They're mixed amongst each other, so it's opportunities to meet with kids that they don't always see. We have some really great team-based approaches. Our teachers work really hard to wrap around all of our students in holistic ways that help them to learn. Sometimes we joke that it's a little bit like bending into a pretzel because they are doing pretty much everything they possibly can to meet the needs of every single kid. And sometimes those needs are so diverse that it takes a mountain of effort and sweat and blood and tears to try to make sure that every student feels really good about their day. And we couldn't be more excited and happier to be a part of the community. It's a wonderful school, and we pretty much love going to work every day.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And we're not perfect. No human being on this planet is perfect. I'll be the first to admit to that. So Jen and I, with our staff, work really hard to make these systems that help us work through things and try to be fair as much as possible. Our number one priority is creating a safe school. And I believe through some of our surveys with staff and some of our circles with students, we hear that things are going relatively well. And we're really happy about that. And now we're shifting gears into looking at more of our curricular sort of offerings and consistency across there. But it's really been super focused on safety, on systems,
And relationships.
relationships. So
Relationships was a huge part of last year, both with staff and with students. And we spent all year making sure that whether it was staff meeting, it was student-led conferences or student-led assemblies, students had the opportunity to build relationships with lots of adults and lots of other kids. One of the highlights, I think, of our year last year was that we expanded our ski and ride program from being just 100 lucky applicants who could get first come, first serve to go skiing or snowboarding at Stowe to every single student gets to go up to the mountain and ski, snowboard, or snowshoe with an adult, whether it's a parent volunteer or with one of our teachers or staff members. And I have heard from both staff and students how amazing the experience is and how they kind of, get to meet a teacher in a different way and see how they're different people than they kind of see them in the classroom. And I think that is something that both Dwayne and I were really passionate about, was really giving that equity focus and allowing all of our students to do something that's different and take healthy risks and build on some of the things that are amazing about this state and about this area.
And if you forget everything that we're saying, go back to the C's. And we
Right.
try to make things simple. So that
Lots of
is the
Cs.
most important thing, building a community of caring, connected, and curious kids. I know kids isn't a C, but it's a C, children. But it's the most important thing, and it's our North Star. It's what we focus on a daily basis. And that's Cross it, Brooke. And Jen is right. We are very happy to go to school, to work school every single day. I feel very lucky to be there. We feel lucky to be there. I feel lucky to be with the staff that we have. And those kids are awesome. Come on by, visit us if you'd
Please.
like.
We'd love to have
It's a great
anybody come
place.
on in.
Well, hit your Uh, oh, well, thank you for presenting to us. And we know you had a hill to climb in the last couple of years, and you were really doing something important there. And it seems great, and it's coming online, and that's in its leadership. So well done. Thank you for taking time to come and talk to us. We're trying to stay connected too. So that is the reason for our highlight section, and this was just right. So thank you very much. All right. All right. Thanks, guys. While Lisa gets comfortable, does anyone have any questions about the leadership report? Those of us who our terms are up is really the most important information in there, and deciding whether or not you're running again. And also deciding or getting your thing into your town hall and getting your petition signed if you are running again. If you're not, you are letting us know. So if anyone has any questions though, please raise your virtual hand or your real hand. Okay. I hear from the students now. 1 second, Zoomers. We are loading the kids' slideshow. Okay, Ellie had to go because she had another commitment, but the rest of the gang is here. So Cashel and Celia and Grady, let's hear it.
All right, so this is the student report. Next slide. All right, so Harwood happenings. There's been a couple things have been going on. The winter sports have started up. The boys and the girls hockey teams both had their first games on Saturday, and they both sadly lost. But they put up good fights, and yeah, there's a reason we didn't put the scores in for them. The boys basketball team had their first game today, or not today, on Tuesday, and they won 65 to 40. So that was really fun to watch. And then Harwood also had their first Nordic race on Monday. Don't know much about that, but I know it happened. And also there is a boys hockey game today. It's an away game, and I think it's in Hartford. And I don't know when it was and if it has already happened, what the score was. But yeah, that's happening as well. We had an assembly today. It is our last assembly of 2024. There were a lot of announcements. We reopened the wellness center, and Cashel actually spoke on that a little bit at the assembly. We also had a masked singer come up who was one of our math teachers, Miss Butler, and she sang "Eye of the Tiger," so that was pretty fun. And then I went out on stage with one of the hosts, and we did a little bit of sparring, Rocky. Uh, and then coming for stuff coming up in the future, we have the Winter Carnival coming up soon, which is like a mini Spirit Week. It's usually only like it lasts the whole week, but we don't usually take off from classes. We just have activities happen during ELOs, and student government is working hard to plan it this year. And I actually met with the president earlier today. He helped me write this down. They are planning student staff games, a rail jam, hot chocolate, and some other outdoor activities such as snow bowling and some snow sculptures. So looking forward to that. The musical is starting up this year. It is Anything Goes. The auditions happened Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday this week, and then rehearsals will start up after break. And speaking of break, we've got 2 days left. And Friday is a half day, and we will be back on the 2nd.
Anything else from you guys? Oh, good.
There we
There we
go.
go.
So our Harwood seniors spent 3 weeks in northern India. 2 of those were spent at a local school where I think they're working on a film. They did the same last year. This is their second year going to India and partnering with the same school. Um, and I've heard that the views were a little nicer this year. It was more it was more open. You got better views of the mountains. But Ellie's favorite thing was making a bunch of friends from the school they visited and lived for about 2 weeks. So the idea of this trip is kind of a cultural exchange, kind of what we're doing in Rwanda as well, just building relationships, and hopefully this will continue on for years to come.
Yeah, and then our last thing was like we obviously love sharing out about the highlights and everything, but we feel like we're missing like a little bit of like our representation. So we wanted to ask the board like, is there anything you'd like to see from us? And is there anything you would like us to ask the student body to like report to you?
Great question and a great offering. Does anyone have anything they want to suggest for the students? We might need a minute to think about that. Danielle.
I don't have anything to suggest, although I love that you asked that question, but I do want to say I was helping at the International Boutique this past weekend, and we had a bunch of students come in. I think it was like 5 different girls come in who had been on the India trip, and they were over the moon about it. I know we have tight budgets. I know we need to do more fundraising. I know all of these things, but when I asked those girls, like, what was the most substantial thing, they all had really substantive eye-opening experiences, and it was the connections with the other students there was the most fundamental. And one of them is actually going to go back and do a semester abroad there. She's so excited, and just these experiences, we need our kids to have them however we can. And I think that the school offering them is such a critical thing, and I would really like us to make sure we keep our eye on that prize, because there's no replacement for those trips abroad.
Thanks, Danielle. Yeah, and we don't actually fund that trip. That's student fundraised, right, entirely, but we do support the program, and it is amazing. I agree with her that getting people out in the world is so important. Life?
Thanks for the presentation. Nice work. Great update. Around the anything to check in with students about, I'm thinking the cell phone policy. Like if we're writing one, and I know at least some of you are on that committee, right? Oh, that's amazing. So, I mean, that seems like that's going to be a really important role for you to bring the perspective on how it's been going and what should be in a policy, what should stay more flexible. So I'm excited for you to do that work. Thank you.
Response to that. I remember earlier this semester there was talk around having a school dialogue. That's kind of fizzled out, but I think we should be getting that started when the new year comes. And yeah, the student government sent out surveys and such, but we'll start to stir up some conversation and get it going.
I'm on the student gov, and we're still gonna have a school dialogue. It just isn't being gonna be about the phone, so that'll be a happening that comes up soon. But no, yeah, it's definitely no, it's not about the phones. I think I'm not. I think it's kind of people are getting to the point where they're accepting it, and the people who are gonna follow it are following it, and the people who aren't are getting in trouble, and it's just not really in the front of people's minds in the building anymore.
I think in the next 6 weeks to 2 months, I don't know how exactly when it is, we have got to have a budget ready to that's presented that'll be on the Australian ballot on town meeting day. So it has to go in a way bit before that. And it seemed to me that last year when we were having our problems with our budget not passing a couple of times, we wound up doing some work with students at some point and students were involved in even some of the communications with the residents of their different towns and stuff. And just, I guess that I'd like to put out to you guys what you see as the best way that we could engage students in some of the budget process that's coming up. Maybe it already is happening, and then we'd love to hear about what it is that you guys are doing. But what I would ask is that you be sure that students know that they can listen in on these school board meetings too, and especially ones where the agenda has a section on budget or something like that. They might be interested in gaining some understanding about how our budget works then.
That is a wonderful idea. Um, I remember last year when we were talking about the bond, I was very interested in that and actually created a school dialogue that um, we everyone in the school participated in it, and we went just through classrooms through TA, and I think that would be great to do when budget season starts ramping up.
Could probably bring it up in an assembly at some point. Mention to this because the entire student body will be there. Mention how this is what's going on. You can do stuff to help. I remember last year, during TA one time, everybody made signs, went out and stood by the road.
That's true.
Yeah, that was an interesting TA. But no, yeah, there's definitely ways that we could get people knowing what's going on.
One other really effective thing was signing up would-be voters who were turning 18 and getting people to get registered to vote so they could vote on the budget as well as in future elections, but that would be something. We'll work on ideas where we can engage, but those are two good ones, the budget and the cell phone policy. I mean, those are on the cook, so thank you. Okay. Dr. Mike has a written report. Shall we hear about that?
Start off by commenting when we talked about when the board formed members for a cell phone policy. One of the discussions we had was putting it in context of waiting until we see what bills are introduced, and having just met with other regional superintendents and receiving a report from our state executive director, there's considerable movement behind adopting a legislation related to this. There's considerable support among a number of organizations, from pediatricians to the Vermont NEA to the Vermont Principals Association. So it's my recommendation that we hold off till we see what kind of action occurs, because if the legislature takes action to ban cell phones in schools, they will put out a policy as part of that legislation. So we don't want to adopt a policy and then have to rewrite the policy 2 months later. So, but I am hearing that there's considerable interest in that. So I put out my report, a number of items that I listed, including the December break, which occurs in just 2 days. Just an update on intra-district choice and the timeline for that process. We're starting to work on the school calendar for next year. Information on the town of Waitsfield wastewater planning project and some work they're going to be doing, some test boring they're going to be doing over the break at the Waitsfield school. And then I mentioned the best schools designation from U.S. News and World Report. So I listed out all the information for all of our schools, which is quite impressive. as well as some information from niche.com, which is another website that does school ratings. And in my summary, I make note that that ratings and rankings and test scores are just one piece of overall school quality, but I think we've received a lot of questions, including the budget meeting last week, of how we do rate, and I think that's important to note. And I had a really good question from a board member last when I mentioned it verbally, and I did research U.S. News and World Report. Half of their formula when they assess proficiencies is based on socioeconomic status. So that is a piece of their evaluations. And if you look at our elementary schools, uh, we use, the state still uses free and reduced lunch, and that's changing because of universal meals, but we still receive data along those lines. And the school with the highest number of free and reduced lunch is actually the Warren School, and the second highest is the Waitsfield School. So both of those schools were high on the list. So that I think it's just a result of them using that calculation. Are we serving students who are economically disadvantaged and giving them the same opportunities of other students? So I think the evidence is clearly yes to that question. And I'm happy to take questions on that topic or anything else that that you want to discuss.
Any questions? Dan?
Can you just give us a quick update on the commission?
The Commission for the Future of Public Education in Vermont, we had another virtual meeting on Monday. We have been working on our preliminary report, which we finalized Monday, and I will send a copy to the board when that occurs. And our report is short-term cost considerations, and that we determined is very difficult to do in the short term because most of the work that has to be done to change how we fund schools, even though it will start in the short term, a lot of our cost drivers can't be fixed in 1 year. For example, healthcare. We can't control what those healthcare numbers are without the legislature looking at changing the way the system operates. So there's a lot of complexity, but we look forward to really diving in. A lot of our work over the last 5 months has really been to pull the information, to hear reports in different places. A lot of the work has already been done through reports to the legislature. It's just our job as a commission to pull together all those various pieces with different people at the table and try to make some recommendations. So I think we have a lot of work ahead of us, but I think that first piece was very successful, and there will be a lot of discussion in this legislative session that will be focused on schools. So I think the answer there is stay tuned, and we will continue our work, but part of our report was to be available to the legislature and committees as they begin to discuss different bills and different proposals, and we would expect that the Governor Scott's administration will have some proposals as well to share with the legislature.
Okay, we are going to move on then to board reports. I think that Mike had to jump off and deal with the town situation, so he is not on, but does any other committee have or want to report in on anything? No? Steve, anything? Change. Yeah, he emailed, that's okay. He's shaking his head. I can't. That it's good. I think everybody knows we are going to start the sponsorship committee. We went a little out of whack in our work last week where we should have made that subcommittee in the finance committee meeting. It did not happen in their agenda, so we're postponing forming that committee until January 15th, and then they will warn a meeting and have their first discussion about do we want to pursue sponsorships. So that's kind of where everyone got that email, but that's where we are on that. We got a little help from the Waterbury Roundabout. Shout out there. Okay, so no board reports. That brings us to our budget discussion about finance. And that's Lisa is going to give us yet another date, and then we are going to hear about transportation bids. Right.
Good.
For-
I'll share it by email. Lisa just finished it up this afternoon. And it was after our person who updates it. Once, just so everyone understands, once the agenda is warned, uh, Shannon Wisdom and Meg Libby kind of lock down the access, so Lisa and I can't get in and edit it, and we do that just to ensure that that nothing's inadvertently changed on an agenda that's already warned. So it also, though, locks it down, so we can't share, we can't link the presentations after that period unless either Shannon or Meg do that. So that's kind of the backstory of why we lock down the agendas after they're warned.
Gosh, I don't even know where to start. So many things have changed in the last couple of days. Okay, well, we'll start at the beginning. Next slide. Many of these slides are the same slides that we did for the our first budget presentation last Thursday night. God, days are going by so fast. Last Thursday night, I thought it went very well. But just to reiterate, we kept some of the same slides. To reiterate, if we were to keep a level service, we were looking at a $3.4 million increase if we were keeping a level service. The governor recommended in his letter less than 3%. The board recommended a 2.5% year over year increase. With that 2.75 year over year increase, we would be looking at approximately a $2.4 million reduction in our overall expenses. Next slide. As Mike mentioned earlier, what do we have to be proud of is 8 of our schools are in the top 25% of the state. Elementary schools, Warren rated number 3. I'm sorry, Waitsfield number 3, Warren number 9. Moortown, Fayston, and Brookside. You'll see the numbers there where they've all rated. So of the 272 middle schools in Vermont, Crossbrook and Harwood were named Crossbrook number 16, Harwood number 30, and of the 56 high schools in Vermont, Harwood is rated number 12. So we have a lot to be proud of. We do a lot of great things here, and we have. Oh yes, yeah, that's wrong. That's the correct. Yes, that's. Yes, we have to correct that. I have to go back and look at that. Okay, next slide. Correction. So our challenges, as I mentioned earlier, 7.3% for level service, which is almost a 3.5 if you roll it up, 3.496,180 for a budget increase for level service. That was the early preliminary numbers are still coming in. Things are changing. So that was my original level service projection. What does that mean to us? So if we were to look at what we need to collect for property taxes and what we're asking the state to fund, there's a big difference in terms of what our property taxes raises and what we keep in district to fund the school versus what then is sent out to other districts. Next slide. We shared this slide earlier. We updated it from what we know in fiscal year 23. Each of our towns collected in fiscal year 23 a total of $50.7 million. That approved budget in fiscal year 23 was $42.6 million, so nearly 8.1 million went out to other districts as part of Act 60 is equality education throughout all of Vermont. So on average, over the last couple of years, we've retained 84 cents on the dollar within the district, and 16 cents on the dollar went outside of our district to fund other schools in Vermont. Next slide. This is just mirroring how we've compared to inflation over the last couple of years. Our projected budget versus prior years. Obviously, we don't know what the inflation rate is going to be for fiscal year 26 yet, but you can see how we compared our approved voted budget to inflation. Next slide. Just again, reiterating, we're looking at a 6.1 increase statewide average in all preliminary budgets in the December 1 tax letter. Early on, the process is all the districts need to be able to send a preliminary number of where we think we're going to land, and that's how they have, with those preliminary numbers, how the state then estimates the yield and the property taxes. We again are looking at a 2.75% year-over-year increase. Next slide. Just trying to go through these quickly. So and I mentioned this last meeting, what's key, even though we have a 2.75% year-over-year increase, we are looking at only a 2% increase in our educational spend that we're asking the state to fund for our district. Because we brought in nearly 7% additional revenue, that offsets our expenses. So the ask is really only a 2% increase over the current fiscal year budget. Next slide. And that's really small, and I apologize. This is really just giving a description of all the high categories of what's in those categories. Obviously wages of labor and fringe benefits, but we have, I'm trying, it's small, I got to put my glasses on. For instance, purchase services, that's primarily health services, services for the operation of the district, professional services, and you can reach each one of those categories. And I'll also provide a line item budget. But what this column, what this spreadsheet represents is what we're looking at for fiscal year 25-6 target versus what our level service budget would have been. And again, 2.75% increase with an increase of only $1.3 million. With that increase, we are looking, we've cut as much as we've cut below the line to meet our targets, but we are looking at staff reductions, and we're looking anywhere from 15 to 20 FTEs in our staff reductions to be able to meet our target. Next slide. So we've been talking over these numbers, and where the bottom line is where our district tax rate is going to, what will result in our district tax rate. So with our year-over-year increase and our only 2% increase in our educational spend, the new LTW ADM's V2 just came out. This is where it used to be equalized pupil. This is our long-term average daily membership. That number now has slightly increased. So in V2, in V1, we actually had a reduction of 33 head counts. In V2, that number, and that's why it's still green, because this is still, there were some issues with the long-term weighted averages V1 review. The data was not correct. And now with this V2 version, we actually were bumped up by 45 head counts. So you could see the fluctuation with every new version that comes out until it's solidified and they lock it down, which won't be until probably early second week of January. That number can change drastically. One of the issues, and I know Mike had heard this, but in my VASBO meeting, some districts were saying they got an additional head count of 1,100, 1,200. Some had a reduction of 900. We only had a reduction of 3,300, but I do 33. But what I do know is one of the biggest issues is statewide for early intervention students, they only had 74 students. So there was problems with the data. They went back, Brad's back, Brad James is back. He's going through the data, looking at the data, and there could possibly be a version 3 that'll be coming out after January.
When she said Brad James is the person who was the AOE head finance person and retired last year. Nicole Lee replaced him. She was there for less than a year and she resigned from the agency. So they have Brad working part-time out of retirement.
Next him back. So where does that put us in terms of our cost per equalized pupil, our weighted cost? So our weighted cost, when you take our equalized or long-term weighted average and divide that by our educational spend, our cost per pupil then becomes $15,483.98. Again, that's weighted. I want to keep pointing that out. That's a weighted average based on those different categories of students. I'm not sure if everybody has had an opportunity to read the December 1st tax letter, but it also, in that December 1st tax letter, it alludes to a 15% statewide adjustment. And it also noted that the preliminary yield, of course, the yield is not set until the end of the legislature session, which is June, but the preliminary yield right now with that statewide adjustment is 8,553. So if you back out the statewide adjustment, you would divide that number and you would, by the 72%, the yield is actually up by 11,879. You would adjust it by that 72%. So we're looking right now, that yield of $8,553. And if you recall, each year we were receiving a taxing capacity discount with Act 127. In the current year, we received 9 cents. In fiscal year 26, it's being reduced over the next 5 years. In fiscal year 26, it would have been 7 cents. But with the statewide adjustment, we now need to adjust that taxing capacity discount and apply it to that 7 cents 7 cents, which then raises that taxing capacity discount up to 10 cents. And I know it's complicated, but I'm trying to walk everybody through this. So that raises our taxing, our district tax rate to 1.71 compared to last year's $1.45. So $1.45 versus projected fiscal year 26, $1.71. Right now on the front end, this looks like and we talked about this at the last board meeting, it looks like even with a 2% increase in our ask to fund our district, it looks like our tax rate has increased by 15.1% with the statewide adjustment pre-CLA. That is to put pressures on the school district to be able to not point fingers at the CLAs, but then also to keep costs down. We talked about this at the last board meeting. It's almost like smoke and mirrors. One thing I do want to point out before we go to the next slide, why the equalized weighted pupil is in red is because we are extremely close to the excess spending threshold of 15,926 in the upper right-hand corner. And anytime those green numbers change, it will change that cost per pupil. So we have to be very cautious of getting very close to that 15,926 because there is a penalty in fiscal year 26 that's being implemented anytime we exceed that threshold.
As we talk through in presentations and preparing, one of the questions we anticipate people will say is, well, if the district has done a good job in comparison to other districts in the state in reducing costs, staying at 2% ed spend increase, should we look at not decreasing the budget by as much so we can retain positions? And our answer to that is we are very close to the excess spending threshold. We are one of the highest spending school districts in the state. And those pressures, as the taxing rate capacity discount continues to go down the next few years, if we don't continue to reduce, then we will be in trouble uh, in a couple of years. So we have to continue to reduce, as painful as it is, and it is getting more and more challenging, as we'll talk later, with making those reductions. That we have to start looking structurally at the district, because we just can't continue to reduce the way we are without looking at other possibilities.
Feel I just, at least from my position here on the board, trying to talk to people, looking at that 15.1%, which you keep telling me is like a smoke and mirrors and isn't really what it's going to be. Why do we have to include that line? I don't, if that's not really what it's going to be, why do we don't do other stuff where we're going through the, the different machinations of figuring things? But that one we seem to have to keep, and that's going to just have people, whatever.
Yes. So we have to show that because it's our district tax rate that then gets applied to each town's CLA. So I have to be able to show how I come up with that district tax rate. And that's why I keep saying, and I use this language of smoke and mirrors, because it's putting pressure pre-CLA when they're going to be adjusting post-CLA.
So for us as board people, when people ask us about that, the issue is that these figures still do not include the CLA, and that the CLA will change that significantly, presumably.
And that's where it gets confusing. And if you saw Lisa's presentation last week in the community meeting, she did not go into that detail because it is so confusing, but we want to be transparent in the board meeting. So the pre-CLA, post-CLA, it really is, what they've done is they've averaged out what they see as the CLA percentage statewide. So they do that up front. And then, for example, Moortown just went through reassessment. So their number is at, I can't remember what 140. So their number will significantly go down with the way that the legislature has rewritten the procedures for this. So so it's kind of post CLA, but post CLA application of a statewide number, but pre what your towns actually are at based on their assessed value. So it's just complicated, which is why Lisa omitted that part in the community presentations, because people's heads spin until you really think through it. And the board has heard the presentations for 2 years on this. So that's why we want to make sure that you all understand it at the same time. And I do want to say too, and Ashley and I talked about this earlier, we had a citizen who's a parent reach out to Lisa and me about 2 months ago, who had some time. He has expertise in business and taking complex terms and putting them out in a very simple phrases. His name's Asher. He was at the meeting last week, and he has sat down with us a number of times since Steve Rosenberg was on outreach. We've looped Steve in on that, but he's been working with the administration to help take our presentations when we go to the public. And he puts the lens on of, I didn't understand a lot of what you said last year, so talk me through this. We've spent a lot of time talking through, and then he has worked to help us translate that for our citizens. So I just wanted to mention that he's been working with us, just again as a volunteer advisor to the administration, and wanted to recognize his work because it's really been helpful. One of the things he said is, his school's PTO wanted some information, but when we would give them the information from our board meetings, they didn't understand it because it was this kind of language.
He helping us as a board? You said he's been working with the administration. At some point, will he be helping some of us board members to understand better, or not better ways, but ways to present this information?
Well, and that's what we're doing, and that's kind of the end result. What he's helping us, so that when we come to you with the presentations like we had last week, that they will be more understandable. So kind of working through us to get to the board and make sure. So if you have questions or comments or recommendations, we can certainly go back. We meet periodically with him to kind of run this by him from, you know, a regular citizen perspective.
Yeah, he's really into very cool, clean graphics that make it things. I noticed two slides that came up that I thought were his slides during our community presentation. So I have a question. I'm just trying to understand the yield as it is now with the 72% applied to it, the 8,553. So that is like roughly 72% of like the true yield? Like I mean, is that what that number is? Okay, so the smoke and mirrors is to that just the fact that this number is lower is supposed to confuse us? Is that really
Well, it makes
right?
our district tax rate look much higher.
Right.
So, and this is why it's complicated. We need to only show this because we have to get to our district tax rate, and I have to show how I'm getting to that $1.71. If you go to the next slide, this is where the adjustments really show for post CLAs. So the statewide adjustment is 72%. You're right, go back. One more page. So if this is hypothetical, hypothetical based on what we know today, and just also based on the in the third paragraph in the tax letter, you'll see where I got the state SACLA is a state adjustment, statewide adjustment to the CLAs where I got that. However, they're only to a 2 decimal place. It really needs to go to a 4 decimal. CLAs really do not come out until the first or second week of January. So this is all hypothetical and very preliminary. But based on what I know today with the adjusted LTW ADM and what was in the tax letter for the yield, I then take our $1.71, you'll see less adjusted district tax rate of $1.71, and I then apply it to each one of the town's CLAs. And you'll see where, for instance, Duxbury's current CLA in fiscal year 25 is 68.43%. The projected statewide adjustment for Duxbury is going to be 90%. They take the preliminary fiscal year 26 CLA and they apply that to 72%. If you you can go to the tax letter and see what the number is. I didn't put the number is, but if you back out and divide it, you'll see what the actual preliminary fiscal year 26 CLA is unadjusted, but the adjusted rate is what I put in there. I've also included the last time each of the towns were appraised. In Duxbury, they have not been appraised, reappraised since 2015, so that the information is there. But you'll see, this is very preliminary, but you will see if things stay the same, there could be a reduction in taxes based on these statewide adjustments. But again, hypothetical, very preliminary. Numbers change all the time, and they solidify more and more in the second week of January. If you
Yet, because it is so early in the process, but we felt that it just illustrates the complexity, the volatility, and we wanted to show people that what we have done based on the board's direction so far with the budget for most towns would produce numbers that look significantly different than what we saw in tax rates last year.
Actually, I have two questions. The first one is if you can explain to me why Faison is in the black, just because I was almost following you there. So I just want to bring it home. And then my other question had to do with the prior slide and how they determine the excess spending threshold and how much of a moving target that is every year.
So, Facein actually, the current year is 71%. In, I believe their statewide pre-adjustment is 55%. They plummeted and based on their CLA, projected CLA. So their numbers are slightly up because of the fluctuation in their CLA. You'll see even with Warren went from 61 to 73%, but for some reason, Facein, and again, this is very preliminary, in the statewide adjustment, it just, it just, I know it plummeted down to 55%. So I want to caution everybody about this. I'm not saying there's going to be reductions throughout every town, but this is very preliminary. And bottom line is everybody wants to always look at their taxes. So this is just an early view of what we know today. But I do want to point out that the yield is being questioned. The LTW ADMs are being questioned. And you'll see by this, the only town that really was their adjustment was Moortown. Moortown was adjusted up to, because they were reappraised in the current year, fiscal year 24, their adjustment went from 110 to up to the statewide adjustment to 144% of appraised value of their homes.
Is linked in the tax commissioner's letter, the preliminary numbers, but the CLAs aren't released officially till next month.
Clarify, you said that the person who was in charge of actually understanding this quit their job in the first year and they had to call in another guy to, okay, I just wanted to check that that's what we're talking about.
Yes, yes. Nicole actually left and went to the bond bank. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Did go to the bond bank. That sounds like a lot more fun, actually.
So if we go back, I just wanted to ask your other question is and the other thing is, what also is very preliminary is what the districts submitted in for their budgets early on. So we had to submit the second week of December what our preliminary budgets were and where we would all fall. And that again is all based on how they projected that yield. So all of those numbers are volatile, they could change. So I just want to point that out. The statewide adjustment excess threshold is the same thing. It's all based on preliminary numbers, preliminary budgets, and until everything is solidified, that could change. It doesn't change much when I plugged in the different LTW ADM. It doesn't change much. So that's very preliminary.
Just going back to Facein for a quick second, you mentioned twice that the Facein preliminary CLA dropped to 55%, which explains the property tax rate going up. But on the chart, you have it going up to 76%. Is that just a typo, or am I reading that wrong? It's with the adjustment.
Page of resources, the tax letter is linked in there. And if you go to, actually, Mike, do you want, or Cindy, we can just pull it up right now. Okay. And then click on that first link there. Yep. And that'll give you by town the adjustments. So you'll see by town, you can go over the very first right column is what they're projecting the CLAs to be in fiscal year 26. And then the very last column on the right is the statewide adjustment of the 72%. And you can scroll down and see Facein. Yep, right there. So, yes, that's where you see the 55%. But again, these are very preliminary. They're only 2 decimals and they're very, very, very preliminary. Lately we don't get good numbers until we see a V3. So, yes, thank you. But that's linked in my resources on our page. So one thing I just wanted to be able to share is numbers are changing daily. And it's very difficult to do. It's a manual report from our financial system to be able to do line items. I will link into the agenda a line item budget. And I shared it at the finance committee, the line item budget. I went over that, but things already has changed since I presented that on December 11th. So I will post in the agenda the newest line item budget. What I've done is I've pulled it up. I displayed in here by the large categories, but then I broke down the categories based on athletics, special education, in direct instruction. So I did it in different categories, and I will link that in the agenda. I think it's too much to go over line by line here, but I will send that out to everybody as well and then link it into the agenda. I'm sorry, I'll post it on my website and then send it out to you guys, the actual line item, itemized budgets.
And we do want to again note, like we did last week, and Lisa's talked to the finance committee about with the reductions that are necessary. Lisa has spent tremendous time going through line items from the last 3 years to see what averages are and where she can kind of scrub below the line. But at this point in time, we're looking at a reduction. Last year, we had a reduction of staff, reduction of 27 and a half positions. With this budget, as of today, we'd be looking at 15 to 20. So it's a big impact to operations across the district, and that's central office to teaching staff to support staff. We're looking at reductions in all areas, and we'll come back to the board in January with some of the buckets that we're considering.
So one of the things that we need to look at is there's different parities between a teacher and a para and salaries, and we need to look at also the seniority list and look at all of that. So there's always a range, and until we understand where each position falls, then we'll have a better idea. And we're working on that now. We'll come back in January to be able to go with that, review that with the board. Any questions?
Oh. Uh,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
oh, are you calling on me?
No, hold on just a second, Bobby.
I have it here.
No.
Okay, looking at the last line on that slide, right before the one that's on the screen right now, back one more. Right, okay. The percent change on that 0.45 and then the 1.45 and the 1.71. Was that C? I seem to be getting more like 18% than 15%. But this is just a caution. It's a reporter doing math. So like full disclosure. Okay.
Oh, it's 1.4.
Go ahead, Bobby.
Sorry, I just really wanted to, it's so hard with these numbers changing all the time, and I really appreciate the work that Lisa has done.
Yes, we all do. I don't know how you're doing it without, I'd be up all night. You are, so that probably explains that. Um, okay, any further questions for Lisa? Thank you, Lisa. All right, Lisa Scagliotti's second save of the day. She just corrected something on the. Okay. Okay. All right, thank you, Lisa. All right, we're going to move on in this meeting to transportation bids, which is our only action item.
And I do, while Lisa's pulling that up, we have Dan Sargent from First Student in the audience. And Lisa, I don't know the names, but I know there were some people who were going from other companies that were going to be in the Zoom that we want to promote to panelists. Can you tell me who they are?
Nolan?
You have Ben Henry with First Student, the area general manager on Zoom.
Okay, great. Say your name, please.
My name is Ben Henry.
Ben Henry. Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else?
Joel from Lemoy
Lemoy.
Valley Transportation, and then also Stacy Emerson from Student Transportation of Vermont.
I see Stacy.
Okay.
I do not see, and I see Ben, but I do not see
And who
Joel.
from Lamoille?
Joel.
Joel. Is Joel from Lamoille here? If so you can
I-47. Oh,
unmute
maybe.
yourself.
And then we have Dan Sargent here.
Okay, I see an extra iPhone on there with no name, but, and I see Stacy and Ben.
Okay. Jennifer, Stacy there. I'm not sure if Jennifer's joining as well. So good news is we went out to bid for our transportations for an RFP. We received three responses. One from Student Transportation of Vermont, one from First Student, and one from Lamoille Valley Transportation. In the RFP, we requested daily rates for 13 routes. We currently, in our current contract, we had 17 routes, but because of the short drivers, we looked. Can you pull that up?
Yep.
Okay. We had 13 routes. We're down to 13 routes, so we bid out at 13 routes. What I did was there is the bid sheet that compares the daily rates for the regular routes, the Barry vocational routes, our route to Choice, our route to Laraway, and you can see all the detailed information based on each one of the bids from the three different vendors.
Could you just do it just for the board's sake, just because we use different kinds of terms, and explain that this really is a request for proposal and how that process works?
Right. So this is a request for proposal. It's not three quotes. It's a request for proposal. We're going out to vendors and we posted it where they're going to then propose operations of what it would be based on our methodology and our bid process in terms of what we're requesting. So we're requesting a daily rate of 13 buses. We supplied the routes that we currently have, and then we asked them to be able to bid on costs for those routes. Then we have a public opening of those, which was on Friday, December 13th at 2 p.m. Everybody was in attendance except Lamoille. First Student attended in person and with the opening of the bids, and Student Transportation of Vermont also attended. We calculated all the bids, put it into one bid spreadsheet. Right now you're looking, what's viewed up there is the summary of all the routes that add up to our total costs in terms of our daily routes, whether it be our regular bus routes to and from schools, our VOTEC route, and our special ed buses, whether it's be to Choice or Laraway. And then the other detailed information is the costs of gas, our field trips, and that more of that information is on the second tab called the bids, and it gives line by line the cost comparisons to each of the vendors. Right. Yeah. So what I wanted to be able to share is the cost with our field trips. It all is based on the number of field trips each school takes each year, so it's as needed. What I want to look at and compare apples to apples through the three vendors is our base busing. What is it going to cost daily for our base busing for our routes to and from school, our routes to VOTEC, CVCC, our route to to Laraway, and to Choice. And you'll see the executive summary. I do have all three vendors here. If anybody has questions regarding the vendors, and we can ask them. They can ask questions directly to them. I did include as much information that was included in their bid. And I also linked on that second tab in the bids. You can click on the actual bid from each of the vendors and you'll see more details. If Cindy, if you go to the second tab and you scroll to the top, you can see it's highlighted. You can go to each one of the bid information. Student Transportation of Vermont actually they have their book was over I think 300 pages. So I didn't scan all of that, but it is available in my office if anybody wants to go through it. But we provided the main page for each of the vendors. So with the daily rate, you can see based on the number of 13 buses, we've if you go back to the first page on the executive summary. I was just going to, let me just finish this and then, yep. So you'll see the overall, I broke it down by a 3-year, it's a 3-year bid. You'll see fiscal year 26, 27, and 28. And what the estimated total annual cost would be from each of the vendors. So in fiscal year 26, First Student Transportation of Vermont would be $1,435,276, and then you can just read across it. First student would be $1,311,696, and then Lamoille Valley Transportation would be $1,762,811.60, and that's an annual cost. And did you have a question?
Something I'd like to ask all three vendors is there anything that we should take into account for the buses that you're providing? For example, like, are you providing electric buses? Are you providing buses that have available Wi-Fi on it? Or is there something unique about your buses that we should take into account?
This is Jen Nolan. Sure. Hi, this is Jen Nolan. Can you hear me?
And go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So my understanding, our bid, what she has outlined here is a bit more. We do have all new vehicles slated. Also, as far as, typically with First Student, there's been minivans used for the SPED, and we'd like to upgrade those to Suburbans, 4-wheel drive Suburbans, which might make a difference to some families.
You?
Just if you go onto that second page on the very bottom, you'll see the age of the buses. First, student transportation would be in their detailed information, would be purchasing buses for fiscal year 2025. The age of the bus would be fiscal year 2025. All that information is on that second page.
Any questions?
How are you? Ben Henry with First Student. We are more than happy to speak about electric vehicles. We've First Student has traveled 4 million miles with electric vehicles. We would be happy to have that discussion with you. As far as Wi-Fi as well, that is something that if you would further like to explore that, we are certainly willing to have that conversation as well.
Questions for Ben here, live, go ahead. Real question, go ahead.
Do we have any information on how they compensate their bus drivers?
We do. In the executive summary, our proposition is to go up over 17% in our wages to help attract additional drivers.
And Ben just alluded to that. So the hourly rate that Ben is alluding to of that 17% for first student is going up to $32 an hour. And student transportation of Vermont is currently $29 an hour. And that's in that package information, on that information. On the bid.
Good evening.
Go ahead.
Stacy Emerson from Student Transportation of Vermont.
Yep.
Thank you all for allowing us to participate this evening. I did want to ask a few questions. Our bid is, it will be noted, we based our routes on 4 hours per day, which was a calculation based on the routes that were posted. I did want to let you know that we would be willing to adjust that based on the route times. If there was an adjustment up to the 4 hours per day. And I do know that that was how it was calculated. It was not very clear on the bid proposal what the number of hours per day were being operated. I need to correct myself. We based that on 5 hours per day operating in the bid spec. We would be happy to work with the district to make the change for the 4 hours of operation.
Okay. 5 or under is what Lisa's saying. Thank you. More questions, anyone? Let me look at Zoom here.
Any other question?
Steve Rosenberg, go ahead.
Yeah, there have been some complaints from parents and expressed at the board that a lot of the bus routes seem to have been running with almost empty buses. Do these bids kind of reflect that and adjust for that?
Well, no, we reduced the number of routes. We've reduced the number of routes. So first students buses capacity is 72. Student transportation, because they're purchasing new buses, their passenger buses are equipped for 77. We haven't looked at that in terms of sizes of buses yet.
It has the same size, right? Yeah.
Reduced down to smaller vans or
Right.
mini buses.
And the routes that sometimes run with less students, it would be kind of a logistical nightmare because um, we saw a reduction in ridership in this district. I was not here at the time, but in my district as well as this district in during COVID. The challenge is we have to transport. So if something were to change and all of a sudden on a route, all students decided they wanted to be, and one of the one of the bus companies decided to buy smaller short buses, uh, there's an additional cost to purchasing back and forth. And I'm sure any of the representatives on the call could address that, but it would be a challenge based on the fact that we have to provide to any student who wants to ride the bus.
Basically, that is a tricky topic. How many people are riding the bus? You know, it's up to parents to make that choice, and it's we want them to, but it's not convenient anymore, or post pandemic. Any more questions, Dan?
Yeah, a question maybe for Dan or Lisa. Is there value to us in having a vendor that we've been working with previously to continue? Or is there value in having a new vendor with all new equipment? And does either one outweigh the other?
What I can say is based on, Lisa and I talked about this fact in First Student, when you compare apples to apples, is coming in at a lower amount. They've provided quality service to us. To change, there would have to be a huge reason for us to change. I can say from being a superintendent for 16 years, working with colleagues who've changed bus providers a number of times, the first year, no matter how good the company is, the first year is always difficult because different people are looking at the routes. So based on the numbers we're seeing, we think the person who's coming in at the company that's coming in at the lower price, we would have no hesitation if the board went with that company.
I've had my hand up for a while. I don't know if
Bobby, go ahead.
I guess my question is in terms of the challenges we've had attracting drivers, if the other bus companies have noticed the same challenge.
Stacy, you could answer that, or I don't know.
Can you hear me? I'm trying to unmute myself.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. I think everybody, across the country has experienced a driver shortage, but throughout the course of the last 4 years, we've significantly increased our drivers' rate of pay. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with our company or not, but we do surround your district with the services that we're currently providing to different communities around you. We've been operating out of the Williamstown, Vermont terminal, and we've not experienced a large shortage of staff there. We've had long-term employees, and we've kept our driver pay rates up significantly, and it's worked out really well. On a side note, because we are surrounding the Harwood district, there are other services that we could look at offering collaboratively with your surrounding schools, such as Montpelier. And I did share that information with Lisa on the phone earlier, such as your choice special education route, or your tech runs, or field trips. It's definitely about collaborative services in a lot of school districts in today's industry, and we would look to provide that service to you. And obviously, if you're making a decision tonight and you're looking at it based on the initial bid submission, they are the lowest bidders, and we are the higher bidder, and that is a fact. But the question I would pose to each of you is, what are your route rates hours based on? That is something that you should ask, of the other company. Is it a 4-hour per day route or a 5-hour per day route? Because what you're often seeing with our company, if we're going over hours, we set that tone and say, this is what it will be per day if you go over hour. And I think that's being open and honest as a bidder, and that is something that you should take into consideration with all bidders. But to answer your question, Bobby, yes, everybody is experiencing the driver shortage nationwide. I do think having more facilities around you can help, and you have more areas to pull support from. Thank you.
Thank you for adding that detail. We appreciate that. Are there any other questions out there with the board? Okay. All right. I think that's good. I think that's good. Anybody? No? Well, thank you to everyone who's participated. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. All right. We are moving on then in this agenda.
Lisa, do you need the board to take any action based on this information
Should
tonight?
we do it right now? If we
turn your.
If it could be taken action tonight or on January 8th, so we can include that in the budget projection. Yep. Okay.
January 8th is not an issue. That way you can finalize that and develop a formal motion for the leadership to look at for the agenda review.
Okay.
We can add it to the agenda for January 8th.
Okay. Okay, then we are going to move on to the consent agenda. The consent agenda includes approving the minutes from 12/4, approving the warrants from 12/4 totaling $449,242.32, and also approving the Crossett Brook World Language Overnight International Field Trip to Quebec City. Would someone please?
I'll make that motion.
Make that motion. All right. JB made the motion and Tori seconded. Do we have any abstentions or no votes on the consent agenda? I don't see any hands raised, so not hearing any or seeing any, that will pass. Okay, we are at the end of the agenda, but we have added our executive session. So if you're not on the board, you may go, or if you're a kid, you can go home. And we're going to need a motion.
I moved to enter into, is this working?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. I moved to enter into executive session with all board members, Superintendent Dr. Mike, Director of Finance Lisa Essler, for the purpose of discussing labor relations agreements with employees because premature public knowledge would clearly place the public body or person involved at a substantial disadvantage.
And a motion.
All right, we have a second. All those in favor? Aye. All right, Zoom. We will see you in that breakout room. And take a roll call. Wait 1 second. Yep, he's gonna read it. But we can. Oh shit! Yeah. You have the language. Yes. Okay, so JB's going to read the motion, and then we'll have a second and a roll call. Go ahead, JB.
I move to authorize the administration to extend an early retirement incentive as per Article 17.4 of the collective bargaining agreement between HUUSD and HUEA.
Okay, do you have your roll call in front of you, Cindy, so you can add these in? Okay, I cannot see it, so let's go around the room. Tori. Yeah, you're not gonna. Oh, great, we're back in. Can you share that? Hold on just 1 second. Okay, here we are. Let's start with Bobby.
Yes.
JB, Cindy, John's absent. Elizabeth,
Yes.
Ben,
Yes.
Corey,
Yes.
Life, Tori,
Yes.
Danielle,
Yes.
Mike is absent. Dan
Yes.
and Steve.
Yes.
Okay, yep, and Mike. Mike Bishop, almost third from the bottom. There we go. I'm abstaining. Okay, that is unanimous because thank you, everyone. All right, that is our work for tonight. So I'm looking for a motion to
I
adjourn.
move to adjourn.
Do we have a second? Second from Ben. All those in favor? Happy holidays, everybody. Have a great Christmas or whatever you celebrate.